Skip this video and keep being the person that everyone around you believes they can manage. Keep being predictable. Keep being readable. Keep being the one whose emotional triggers are so visible and so consistent that any person with basic social awareness can press the right button and produce the response they need from you on demand. Keep explaining yourself to people who use the explanation against you. Keep staying in dynamics that are designed to drain you, because the fear of what happens when you leave feels worse than the cost of what happens when you stay. Keep doing all of it, and keep getting the results that all of it produces, which is exactly the set of results that brought you to this video in the first place. Or stop right now and learn the 7 qualities that Machiavelli identified across 15 years of direct observation of the most dangerous, most ruthless, most genuinely powerful, and most impossible to manipulate people he ever encountered. These are not tactics. Tactics can be learned in a conversation and forgotten by the weekend. These are architectural changes, changes in how you are built, changes in the specific internal and behavioral structures that determine whether the manipulator's tools find purchase when they arrive or slide off the surface and land on the ground having accomplished nothing. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what makes certain people impossible to control and exactly how to build those qualities into yourself starting tomorrow morning. Here is what you need to understand before I start. The reason you have been manipulable is not because you are weak. It is because you are good. You are trusting. You are open. You give people the benefit of the doubt because that is what decent people do. You explain yourself because you believe in transparency. You stay because you believe in loyalty. You accommodate because you believe in fairness. Every single one of those qualities is beautiful, and every single one of them, in the hands of someone who does not share them, is a door into the specific parts of you where the manipulation does its work. This video does not ask you to stop being good. It asks you to stop leaving the doors unlocked for people who have demonstrated they do not deserve access. Machiavelli understood this distinction with a precision that most people who read him never appreciate. He was not writing for villains. He was writing for the men who kept losing to villains because their own decency was being used as the entry point for the villain's strategy. The Prince is not a manual for bad people. It is a defense manual for good people who keep getting outmaneuvered by bad ones. And the 7 qualities in this video are the specific defensive structures that the Prince describes, translated into the language of the environments you actually navigate every day. If you are ready to become the version of yourself that cannot be pushed, managed, guilt-tripped, or strategically positioned against, comment the words "I become dangerous now." Like this video because every like puts it in front of someone who is still being managed by people who understood these principles before they did. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. And drop your location and the time right now. This community is real, and right now it matters who is here. Quality 1. Become emotionally unpredictable. The person whose reactions cannot be anticipated is the person who cannot be managed. Let me tell you why predictability is the single most dangerous quality you carry into any contested environment. When you are predictable, when the people around you can anticipate how you will respond to specific triggers with the reliability of someone pressing a button on a machine, you have given them the complete operating manual for how to manage you. They know what makes you defensive. They know what makes you accommodating. They know what makes you angry, what makes you compliant, what makes you retreat, and what makes you overextend. And they know all of this, not because they studied you with malicious intent. They know it because you showed them, consistently, through the repeating pattern of your reactions across months and years of predictable behavior. Most people respond to provocation the same way every time. The challenge arrives, the defense activates, the response follows the same emotional pathway it has followed 100 times before. The room watches this pattern play out and files the information the way any intelligent observer files useful data, quietly, accurately, and with the understanding that this data can be applied in any future interaction where managing this person's response would be strategically useful. Machiavelli would never be predictable. Here's what he would do instead. He observed across every court he sat in that the men who were most difficult to manage were not the strongest or the most aggressive. They were the most variable. Their responses did not follow a pattern that the room could track. The same provocation that produced anger on Tuesday produced quiet amusement on Thursday. The same pressure that produced accommodation last month produced composed refusal this month. The room, which had built its strategy around the assumption that certain inputs would produce certain outputs, found that the outputs had become unreliable. And unreliable outputs mean the strategy built around them cannot be executed with confidence. The manipulator who cannot predict your response cannot design the approach that produces it. And a manipulator without a reliable approach is a manipulator who has been functionally disarmed. Here is your practice. The next time someone does the thing they always do, the provocation, the guilt trip, the subtle pressure, the comment designed to produce the response, you always give a different one, not randomly, deliberately. If you usually defend, acknowledge, and redirect. If you usually accommodate, pause and ask for time to think about it. If you usually engage emotionally, respond with a calm, slightly curious question that puts the other person in the position of explaining themselves rather than watching you react. The specific alternative matters less than the fact that it is different, because the difference is the message. And the message is, you can no longer predict what I will do. That message, delivered consistently across enough interactions, rewrites the room's operating manual for how to handle you. And a room that is operating from an outdated manual is a room that cannot manage you effectively. Let me give you a deeper example. You have a colleague who has learned that criticism makes you defensive. Every time they deliver criticism subtly, publicly, with the specific tone that triggers your defense, you respond the same way. You tighten, you explain, you justify. You demonstrate through the fullness of your defense exactly how much the criticism reached you, and the colleague files this, not maliciously, necessarily, but accurately. This person responds to criticism with defense. The defense can be triggered reliably. The triggering produces a predictable window of diminished composure. That information is now part of how they manage you. Now imagine the next time the criticism arrives and something different happens. Instead of the tightening and the defense, there is a pause, a slight nod, a warm, unhurried response that says something like, "That is an interesting perspective. I will think about that," and then moves on without the emotional signature that used to accompany every response to criticism. The colleague does not know what to do with this. The button was pressed, and the output did not arrive. The strategy that worked last time has failed this time, and the failure introduces something that your predictability had been preventing: uncertainty about how to handle you. That uncertainty is your new advantage, and it was purchased with nothing more than a single different response to the same old trigger. If this shifted something, comment, "I am no longer predictable." Quality 2. Cut every dependency that someone else controls, because the person with no leverage points is the person no leverage can reach. My friend, before I get into this one, I need you to hear something that is going to be uncomfortable, but essential. You are carrying dependencies right now, emotional, professional, social, that you have not identified as dependencies because they do not feel like dependencies. They feel like normal parts of your life. They feel like the things that everyone has, but Machiavelli would look at each of them and ask one question: can someone else use this to move you in a direction you would not choose to move on your own? If the answer is yes, it is not just a part of your life. It is a leverage point. And a leverage point, once it is identified by someone with the motivation to use it, becomes the specific mechanism by which your choices start being made by someone else's interests rather than your own. Machiavelli documented this with the ruthless clarity of someone who had watched it destroy capable men with devastating consistency. He observed that the rulers who were most effectively controlled by their enemies were not the rulers who lacked military strength or political intelligence. They were the rulers who had allowed a critical dependency, a single ally whose support was essential, a single revenue source that could not be replaced, a single relationship whose withdrawal would destabilize everything, to become so central to their position that the threat of its removal governed their behavior more effectively than any direct attack ever could. The attack would have been resisted. The dependency was simply leveraged, and leverage, applied to a genuine dependency, produces compliance without the need for force. Here's the contrast that makes this quality click. Most people accumulate dependencies without noticing them. They build their professional identity around a single organization's recognition. They build their emotional stability around a single person's approval. They build their social position around a single group's inclusion. Each dependency, individually, seems reasonable. Collectively, they create a web of control points that any sufficiently motivated person can reach. Machiavelli would never allow a web of dependencies to form. He would diversify. He would ensure that no single person, no single organization, no single relationship held enough of his stability to function as a lever. Not because he did not value any of them, because he understood that the value of a relationship and the strategic risk of dependence on that relationship are two different things that must be managed separately. Here is your practical exercise. Write down the 3 things in your life that, if they were removed tomorrow, would destabilize you most severely. Not the 3 things you value most, the 3 things whose removal would hit hardest. Those 3 things are your leverage points. And whoever controls them, whoever can offer or withhold them, has a form of influence over your behavior that operates below the level of your conscious decision-making. Your job over the next 6 months is to build alternatives for each one, not replacements, alternatives. A second source of professional identity, a second source of emotional grounding, a second community where your standing is not dependent on the first. Each alternative reduces the leverage that the primary dependency provides. And reduced leverage means reduced vulnerability, which means reduced manipulability, which is the entire point of this video. Let me tell you something about this quality that goes deeper than the strategic level. The dependencies you carry are not just leverage points for manipulators. They are weight, genuine, felt, daily weight that you carry through every interaction and every decision. The dependency on a single person's approval makes every conversation with that person heavier than it needs to be. The dependency on a single organization's recognition makes every professional decision more cautious than it should be. The dependency on a single group's inclusion makes every social interaction more accommodating than your actual values would dictate. The weight is real. You feel it. You have felt it for a long time. And the removal of it through the deliberate, patient, systematic construction of alternatives does not just reduce your vulnerability to manipulation, it makes your entire life lighter, freer, more genuinely yours. Machiavelli would tell you this about dependencies. The person who carries them does not just risk being leveraged, they risk never knowing who they actually are without them. Because the person whose decisions are shaped by what they cannot afford to lose is not making their own decisions. They are making the decisions that the dependencies allow. And those decisions, accumulated over years, produce a life that was built by the leverage rather than by the person living it. Cut the leverage, build the alternatives, and discover, for the first time, what your decisions look like when they are made from genuine freedom rather than managed dependency. Comment "I cut my leverage points" if you just identified something that has been governing your behavior without you naming it as leverage until right now. Quality 3. Make delayed response your default operating mode. The person who does not respond in real time cannot be read in real time. Let me tell you why instant response is one of the most expensive habits you carry, and why every person who has ever successfully manipulated you depended on it. When you respond instantly to a provocation, to a request, to a challenge, to any stimulus that carries emotional charge, you are providing the other person with 2 things simultaneously. You are providing the content of your response, which they can use, and you are providing the emotional signature of your response, which they can use even more effectively. The instant response is unfiltered. It arrives before the thinking has had a chance to catch up with the feeling. And the feeling, arriving without the moderation of thought, tells the other person exactly where the trigger lives, exactly how much charge it carries, and exactly what to press next time they want to produce the same response. Most people respond instantly because the social pressure to respond feels urgent. The message arrives and the instinct says answer now. The challenge is delivered and the instinct says defend now. The provocation lands and the instinct says react now. Machiavelli would never obey that instinct. He would register the stimulus. He would feel whatever the stimulus produced in his body, and then he would do the thing that the manipulator's entire strategy depends on him not doing. He would wait, not forever, not as a punishment, long enough that the response arrives at the speed of thought rather than the speed of feeling. Long enough that the emotional signature has been processed internally rather than discharged externally. Long enough that the other person who was watching for the instant reaction that would tell them what they needed to know about where to push next receives nothing. No data, no feedback, no confirmation that the button they pressed produced the result they were looking for. Here is the Machiavelli contrast. He watched advisors and courtiers destroy their own positions by responding to loaded questions at the speed of emotion rather than the speed of strategy. He documented that the men who paused, who received the question with composure and delivered the response with deliberateness, were consistently evaluated as more intelligent, more trustworthy, and more dangerous by the people asking the questions. Not because their answers were better in content, because the delay itself communicated something about the person delivering it. It communicated that this person's responses are governed by choice rather than by reflex, and a person whose responses are governed by choice is a person whose behavior cannot be predicted by pressing the button that used to produce the automatic output. That person has been effectively removed from the manipulator's playbook. The old plays no longer work, and developing new plays for an unpredictable target is expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. Most manipulators will not bother. They will find an easier target. That is your victory. Let me give you a specific practice that will make this immediately usable in your daily life. Starting tomorrow, implement a personal policy. No significant response within the first 60 seconds of receiving a stimulus that carries emotional charge. Not 60 minutes, 60 seconds. Just long enough to feel the impulse to respond instantly and to choose not to. In those 60 seconds, something happens that the instant response never allows. The first wave of emotion, the hottest, the most reactive, the most likely to contain the data, the manipulator is looking for passes. It does not disappear, it passes. And what replaces it, the slightly cooler, slightly more processed, slightly more measured version of your actual response, is a response that contains your position without containing your emotional signature. The manipulator who receives this response gets the content without the data, and the content without the data is useless for the purpose of calibrating the next move. Machiavelli would tell you something very direct about this practice. He would say, the person who responds after 60 seconds and the person who responds after 0 seconds are giving the same answer in content and giving completely different answers in information. The 0-second response is an open book. The 60-second response is a closed one. Both responses arrive. Both communicate a position. Only one of them communicates the internal landscape that produced the position, and the internal landscape is what the manipulator is actually looking for. Deny them the landscape. Give them the position. That is the practice. That is the discipline. That is the thing that, done consistently, makes you structurally impossible to read in real time. Comment: I respond when I choose, not when I am prompted. If you are ready to stop giving manipulators the real-time emotional data they need to calibrate their next move. Quality 4. Build a reputation for consequences. People do not test boundaries that are known to be enforced. My friend, this is the quality that most people find hardest to build because it requires the one thing that good people consistently resist doing: following through on the uncomfortable. Setting a boundary is easy. Saying the words, "I will not tolerate this," is easy. What is hard is the moment after the boundary is crossed, the moment when following through on the stated consequence feels more expensive than absorbing the violation and hoping it does not happen again. That moment is where most people's boundaries collapse. And the collapse, once it has happened, teaches the room something that no future boundary statement can undo. It teaches the room that the words are louder than the actions, that the threat is the bluff, that the boundary is the line drawn in the sand by someone who will not actually defend it when the wave arrives. Machiavelli wrote about this with a directness that 500 years of commentary has not softened. He observed that the rulers who were most consistently tested were the rulers who set boundaries without enforcing them. The boundary without consequence is worse than no boundary at all, because no boundary sets no expectation. A boundary that is stated and then not enforced sets the specific expectation that this person announces limits they will not defend. And that expectation, once installed in the minds of the people around you, turns every future boundary you state into an invitation to test rather than a warning to respect. Here is what Machiavelli would do. He would set fewer boundaries and enforce every single one. He would say less about what he would not tolerate and demonstrate more about what happened when it was tried, because the reputation for consequences is not built by talking about consequences. It is built by delivering them, once clearly, without excessive emotion. And without the extended negotiation that most people engage in after the boundary has been crossed, which is itself a form of the boundary collapsing in real time while both parties watch. Here is your practice. Identify one boundary that has been repeatedly crossed by someone in your life, professional or personal. 1, not 7, 1. And the next time it is crossed, follow through, not angrily, not dramatically, with the calm, measured, compositionally settled delivery of someone who stated the consequence in advance and is now executing it exactly as stated. That single act of follow-through, witnessed by the person who crossed the boundary and by anyone else who is observing the dynamic, will do more for your reputation as someone who cannot be pushed than 10 years of stated boundaries that were never enforced. Let me tell you what happens after you follow through once, because the once is what changes everything. The first time you enforce a consequence, the first time you do the uncomfortable thing you stated you would do, when the line was crossed, something shifts in the room that cannot be reversed. The room's model of who you are gets updated. The old model said, "This person states boundaries, but does not enforce them." The new model says, "This person follows through." And the new model, once it is installed, changes every future interaction. Not because you remind people of the consequence, because the reminder is no longer necessary. The room remembers. The room carries the updated model into every subsequent exchange. And the behavior adjusts accordingly, not because people are afraid of you, but because people naturally calibrate their behavior to the known responses of the people around them. A known response of follow-through produces careful behavior. A known response of empty threats produces careless behavior. You have been getting careless behavior because you have been producing empty threats. One follow-through changes the category you are filed in, and the category, once changed, changes everything. Machiavelli would say this about consequences: "It is better to deliver one uncomfortable consequence early than to deliver 10 late, because the early consequence sets the standard before the pattern of violation has been established. The late consequences are always fighting uphill against an established expectation of non-enforcement. Get there first. Set the standard with the first violation, and let the standard do the work for every subsequent interaction without your needing to say another word about it." Comment "I follow through on every consequence" if you understand now why the enforced boundary is worth more than 100 announced ones. Halfway through this video, I want to be direct with you. If these 4 qualities are naming things you have been missing, you need the final 3 more than you know. Qualities 5 through 7 are where this shifts from defense to genuine, structural, permanent power, the kind that does not just protect you from manipulation, but makes the idea of manipulating you something that people stop considering altogether. Subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell. Stay. Quality 5. Stop explaining yourself to people who weaponize your transparency. Every explanation you give a manipulator is ammunition they load into the weapon they point at you. Let me tell you something that Machiavelli understood about explanation. that runs directly counter to everything you were taught about communication. You were taught that explaining yourself is a sign of emotional maturity, that transparency builds trust, that walking people through your reasoning demonstrates the quality of your thinking and earns the respect that quality thinking deserves. And in safe relationships with trustworthy people, all of that is true. But here is what nobody told you clearly enough. The same explanation that builds trust with a trustworthy person builds leverage for a manipulator. The reasoning you shared becomes the specific data they need to construct the argument that undermines your next decision. The vulnerability you offered becomes the exact soft point they press the next time they want you to accommodate something you should refuse. The honesty that was supposed to earn respect has earned something entirely different, a complete map of how to manage you. Machiavelli would never explain to someone who had not earned the explanation through demonstrated trustworthiness. Here is what he would do instead. He would offer the short, warm, compositionally complete response that acknowledges the question without opening the file. This is what I decided. The direction I chose is the one that serves the situation best. I have considered it carefully, and I am settled. Each of these responses is genuine. Each is honest. None of them contains the detailed reasoning that the manipulator needs in order to construct the counter-argument that keeps you defending rather than acting. Here is the Machiavelli contrast that makes this quality land. Most people explain because the silence feels uncomfortable. The question was asked and the social contract says answer fully. Machiavelli would say, the social contract is a tool that the manipulator uses against you. The social contract says explain yourself. The manipulator says, yes, please explain yourself, because every word of the explanation is a piece of information I will use to position against you when the moment is right. Break the contract, not rudely, warmly, with the specific quality of composed selectiveness that communicates. I have decided what I am willing to share, and I am settled in that decision. The manipulator who receives that response has received nothing usable. And a manipulator with nothing usable is a manipulator who has been structurally disarmed. Let me give you a specific scenario. You set a boundary at work, a clear, reasonable, professionally appropriate boundary, and a colleague pushes back, not with a direct challenge, with a question, why now, what changed? And you feel the pull. You feel the urge to lay out the full reasoning, to show them, through the completeness of your explanation, that the boundary is justified, and that you have thought about it carefully and that you are not being unreasonable. And the moment you start explaining, you have done two things simultaneously. You have turned your boundary into a proposition that the other person now has the material to debate. And you have demonstrated that the boundary requires their agreement to remain standing. Both of those outcomes serve the other person. Neither of them serves you. Machiavelli would handle this with 3 sentences or fewer. This is the direction I have chosen. It reflects what is best for the current situation. I am settled in it. Those 3 sentences give nothing away. They provide no material for debate. They communicate composure, certainty, and the specific quality of someone who does not need the room's retroactive endorsement to maintain their position. The boundary stands, not because the room agreed, because you decided. And decisions that are held without explanation are decisions that the room eventually stops questioning, because questioning produces nothing usable. My friend, let me tell you one more thing about this quality that connects it to everything Machiavelli understood about how power operates between people. The person who explains is the person who is still negotiating. The person who holds without explaining is the person who has already decided. And in any room where 2 people are interacting, the person who has already decided is the person the room defers to. Not because deciding is aggressive, because deciding is settled. And settled energy, in any environment where other people's energy is anxious or uncertain, becomes the gravitational center of the room. You do not need the room to agree. You need the room to sense that you have already decided. And the room, sensing that, arranges itself around your certainty the way water arranges itself around a stone. Comment, I choose what I reveal. If you have been giving explanations to people who have been using them as blueprints for how to manage you. Quality 6. Learn to identify the manipulation pattern before the pattern completes its cycle. Recognition is the immune system that makes you impossible to infect. My friend, let me tell you why this quality is different from every other quality in this video. The first 5 qualities are about what you build. This quality is about what you see. And what you see with enough clarity and enough speed determines whether the manipulation ever gets a chance to make contact with the things you have built. Every manipulation follows a pattern, not a unique, custom-designed, never-before-seen pattern, a pattern that has been used before. The flattery that precedes the ask, the guilt that precedes the demand, the manufactured crisis that precedes the extraction of a concession you would not give under normal circumstances. The sudden warmth that precedes the request for something you would normally decline. Each of these sequences has a structure, and the structure, once you have seen it enough times to recognize it in real time, loses its power completely. Because the power of any manipulation depends on the target not seeing it for what it is until after it has produced its effect. The moment you see it, the moment you recognize the flattery as the setup for the ask, the guilt as the precursor to the demand, the warmth as the warmth that always arrives before the extraction, the manipulation has been diffused before it has completed its cycle. Machiavelli would never wait for the manipulation to finish before recognizing it. Here is what he would do. He trained himself through years of direct observation of the most sophisticated manipulators in Renaissance Europe to read the opening move of any social sequence and to assess, before the sequence had progressed beyond its first stage, whether the sequence was genuine or instrumental. Genuine warmth has a different quality from instrumental warmth. Genuine curiosity sounds different from curiosity that is gathering information for later use. Genuine concern feels different from concern that is positioning for an ask. The differences are subtle. They require attention. They require the specific, practiced, daily habit of watching what people do rather than hearing what people say. But once the habit is built, once the pattern recognition system is online and functioning, the manipulator's entire playbook becomes visible before the play has been run. Here is your practice. For the next month, every time someone initiates a social sequence with you, a conversation, a request, an expression of concern, a moment of warmth, ask yourself one question before responding. What is the most likely next move after this opening? Not from suspicion, from curiosity. You are not assuming everyone is manipulating you. You are building the habit of reading the structure of social interactions rather than simply participating in them. And the habit, once built, will show you things that the unobserving person never sees. It will show you the pattern before the pattern completes. And a pattern that has been seen before it completes is a pattern that can never produce the effect it was designed to produce. Let me give you the 3 most common patterns to start watching for, because having specific things to look for accelerates the recognition faster than any general advice about being observant. Pattern 1. Unusual warmth that precedes a request. When someone who is normally neutral or distant suddenly becomes warmer and more attentive, the warmth is often the setup. Not always, but often enough that the pattern is worth tracking. Watch what follows the warmth. If a request arrives within 24 to 48 hours, the warmth was the investment and the request is the return. Pattern 2. The manufactured crisis. Someone presents a situation as urgent and demanding immediate action, when the urgency is not inherent in the situation but is being constructed by the presentation. The crisis is the pressure. The pressure is designed to produce a fast decision. And fast decisions, as you learned earlier in this video, are the decisions that serve the person who manufactured the urgency, rather than the person who was rushed into responding to it. Pattern 3. The guilt that arrives after a boundary. You set a limit. And instead of the limit being respected, what arrives is the specific emotional communication that you are being unreasonable, hurtful, or selfish for having the limit. That communication is not a genuine expression of hurt. It is the manipulator's countermove to the boundary. It is designed to produce guilt. And guilt, if it is not recognized for what it is, a tool, not a truth, produces the accommodation that reverses the boundary without the boundary ever being explicitly overruled. Watch for these three. Track them. Notice when they appear and from whom, and let the noticing do its work without the need for confrontation, because the person who sees the pattern does not need to announce that they have seen it. They simply stop responding to it as though it were genuine, and the not responding is the defense. The recognition is the immune system, and the immune system, once it is active, protects you from infections that the unaware person catches every single time. Comment "I see the pattern" before it lands if you are ready to build the recognition system that makes manipulation structurally impossible. Quality 7. Become genuinely comfortable being alone. The person who does not fear isolation cannot be threatened with exclusion, and the threat of exclusion is the manipulator's most powerful weapon. This is the last quality, and it is the deepest one in this entire video, because it goes to the place where every other form of manipulation gets its power: the fear of being alone, the fear of losing the connection, the fear of being excluded from the group, the relationship, the dynamic that, however costly it has been, still feels better than the alternative of being on the outside of it. That fear is the master key. Every manipulator who has ever operated in your life has used some version of it. The threat that if you do not comply, the relationship will change. The implication that if you enforce the boundary, the warmth will be withdrawn. The unstated but clearly communicated message that your inclusion in this person's world is conditional on your continued cooperation with their agenda. Every one of those threats runs on the same fuel: your fear of what happens when the connection is removed. Machiavelli understood this, with the specific authority of someone who had experienced the most extreme version of it: exile. He was removed from his position, his community, his professional identity, and his daily social world in 1512. The exclusion was total, and the experience taught him something that no amount of theoretical understanding could have produced: that the fear of exclusion is almost always worse than the reality of it. The fear tells you that the isolation will be unbearable. The reality shows you that the isolation is uncomfortable but survivable, and not just survivable, productive, because the space that the exclusion creates is the space where the most important work of a person's life can happen without the distraction and the cost of maintaining the dynamics that were consuming the energy the work required. Here is the contrast. Most people will endure almost anything to avoid exclusion. They will accommodate, they will comply, they will suppress their own needs and their own judgment and their own boundaries in order to maintain the connection that the fear says they cannot survive without. Machiavelli would look at that pattern and say very directly, the connection you cannot survive without is the connection that controls you completely. And a connection that controls you completely is not a relationship. It is a cage with a comfortable interior. The person who can walk out of the cage, who can face the discomfort of the empty space on the other side and sit with it long enough to discover that the space is not empty at all, but full of the things they could never build while they were inside, is the person who can never be threatened with exclusion again. Because the threat has lost its weight, and a threat without weight is not a threat, it is noise. Here is your practice, and it is the most important one in this video. Spend time alone, not as a punishment, not as a performance, as a deliberate, intentional, regularly scheduled practice of being in your own company without the input of anyone else's energy, anyone else's opinion, anyone else's validation. Sit with yourself. Get to know the person who is there when nobody else is. Build a relationship with that person, a genuine, warm, honest, non-judgmental relationship with who you are when the audience has left and the performance has ended, and the only person left in the room is you. Because that person, the one who is there when everyone else is gone, is the foundation on which everything else in this video is built, and a foundation that has been tested by genuine solitude is a foundation that no manipulator can threaten with exclusion. Because exclusion does not scare you anymore. You have been alone. You have survived it. You have built something real inside it. And what you built in the alone is the thing that makes every room you return to treat you differently. Not because you announced the change, because the fear is gone from your eyes. And the room, which has been reading your fear this entire time, suddenly finds that the thing it was using to manage you is no longer there. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice, because the principle is clear and the execution is where most people stop short. Start with one evening a week. One evening where you do not reach for another person's company. Do not call. Do not scroll. Do not fill the space with entertainment that functions as a proxy for human connection. Sit with yourself. Read. Think. Walk. Do the thing that you have been putting off because it only matters to you, and there was always someone else's need that seemed more urgent. One evening a week. And notice what happens. What happens in the first few weeks is discomfort. The silence feels wrong. The absence of another person's energy feels like something is missing. The instinct to reach for the phone, to initiate a conversation, to fill the space with anything other than your own undistracted company will be strong. Let it be strong. Sit with it. Because the discomfort is the dependency announcing itself. It is the specific, felt, physiologically present evidence that your comfort has been outsourced to external sources for so long that the internal source has atrophied. The practice rebuilds it, one evening at a time. One quiet, undistracted, genuinely solitary evening at a time, until the evening stops feeling like deprivation and starts feeling like freedom. And when that shift happens, when the alone feels like home rather than like exile, you will know that the last and deepest leverage point has been removed. Because the person who is at home alone is the person who walks into every room from a position of genuine choice. And genuine choice is the thing that makes you dangerous. Not to anyone else, to the patterns that have been governing you. Those patterns cannot survive in the presence of genuine choice, and you have just built it. Comment, "I am complete in my own company," if that just described the final piece of the architecture you have been building throughout this video. My friend, let me close this out by saying something that I need you to carry with you out of this video. These 7 qualities are not about becoming hard. They are not about becoming cold or ruthless in the way that the word is usually misused. Ruthless, in its original meaning, is simply the absence of pity for the things that are costing you your position, your peace, and your power. Ruthlessness, directed at the patterns that have been draining you, is not cruelty. It is clarity, and clarity, applied consistently to the specific habits, dependencies, and fears that have been making you manipulable, produces a version of yourself that is not less human than the version that existed before. It is more human. Because it is the version that is finally free to choose. Free to love without the love being leveraged. Free to trust without the trust being exploited. Free to be generous without the generosity being consumed. Free, because the doors that used to let the manipulation in have been closed by someone who finally understood which ones were unlocked and who had been walking through them. Machiavelli would say this to you if he could sit across from you right now. He would say, "The world does not reward the good by default. The world rewards the prepared." And preparation, in any environment where manipulation is possible, means building the specific qualities that make the manipulation structurally impossible. Not theoretically difficult, structurally impossible. So that the manipulator's tools, when they arrive, and they will arrive, because that is what the world does find, nothing to grip, nothing to press, nothing to leverage. And the person carrying those tools moves on to someone else, someone whose doors are still open, someone who has not yet watched this video. That is your advantage now. Use it. And let me leave you with one final thought that ties everything together. The 7 qualities in this video are not 7 separate projects. They are 7 faces of one project. And that project is the construction of a self that is genuinely, structurally, permanently free from the specific vulnerabilities that manipulation requires in order to function. Unpredictability removes the manipulator's script. Independence removes their leverage. Delayed response removes their data. Consequences remove their willingness to test. Selective transparency removes their ammunition. Pattern recognition removes their invisibility. And comfort with solitude removes their final and most powerful weapon, the threat that compliance is the price of connection. Build all 7 and you have built something that Machiavelli spent his entire career trying to describe to anyone who was willing to listen. A person who cannot be moved by anything other than their own genuine, freely chosen decision to move. That is dangerous, that is ruthless, that is powerful, and that is who you are becoming right now. Like this video, if any of these 7 qualities named something you have been missing without knowing it had a name, share it with someone you care about who is still being managed by people who understood these principles before they did. They need this more than they know. And subscribe to this channel because the next video goes directly into the specific daily situations where these 7 qualities get tested and how to hold them under genuine pressure when the old patterns try to reassert themselves.